Now, we only have 30 minutes, which is not a lot, and we have two spectacular speakers. So I'm not going, as we've agreed, to introduce them, except to say that Fahd al-Rasheed is Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of King Abdullah City in Saudi Arabia. And next to him is Julie Lein, who is the co-founder and president of Tumml, which I'll let her explain to you what Tumml means. So what we've decided to do is, first of all, for us to have a conversation. But before we have a conversation, we have to kind of get to know who we are. So Fahd, would you talk a few minutes just about what you're doing in Saudi Arabia?
Well, we're building a new city in Saudi Arabia on the west coast of the country.
Fantastic.
It's about 1 hour north of Jeddah. We're building it for 2 million people from scratch, and it is private. In fact, we are publicly listed on the Saudi Stock Exchange, so you can consider the city to be the first publicly listed city in the world. It has a port, which will be one of the largest top 10 ports in the world, an industrial zone where we've already have 70 companies from around the world invested in it, and basically residency for 400,000 units for 2 million people when it's completed.
Sounds amazing. So you can buy a share of stock in a city. Now that's really about new cities, I think. Now what about you, Julie? What are you doing?
Sure. So I'm the co-founder and president of Tumml. We are an urban ventures accelerator. And what that means is that we are a nonprofit that empowers entrepreneurs to solve urban challenges. So we work with entrepreneurs at a really early stage. We're usually their first funder, and we provide a little bit of seed capital, mentorship, an education curriculum, and free office space to really help catalyze these entrepreneurs. So we worked with entrepreneurs dealing with issues like homelessness, to economic development, to transit. What we really want to see is more entrepreneurs that are solving really pressing urban challenges in their communities and looking to scale those solutions from city to city, which we see as the sign of success for entrepreneurs.
Okay, so we have the city builder and we have the accelerator for entrepreneurs. Now, Fahd, what do you think you can use that she can give you?
Actually, probably we shouldn't do anything. I mean, we should make a deal right now.
There we are.
You can come do it for us.
Not only is this a stock exchange company, but we're doing the first merger right here. What can you do? What can she do for you?
I think it's very important when we're looking at entrepreneurship to understand what entrepreneurs want. And for us, because we're building a new city, we looked at some study, actually a study here that was done in the US, about 150 entrepreneurs that were interviewed, and 3 out of 4 of them have moved post-college to the city that they started their. So 3 out of 4 of the entrepreneurs that they were interviewed actually did not start their company in the same city they graduated. So they are highly mobile.
So they moved somewhere.
Yes, they are highly mobile, but then they are very sticky.
And they stay where they moved.
Yes, at least they start their companies after staying in their cities about 2 to 8 years. So that's 80% of the entrepreneurs that were interviewed. And then we looked at what they look for. And they were given 40 items, basically, 40 items. And actually 31% of them said they look for places that have talent, that can attract talent. 20% of them said they look for quality of life. So you're talking about almost 50% of them saying it's about talent and quality of life, which I think is very much interrelated. But then 20% of them said, we need a market. And another 20% of them said, we need access to other markets. So, airports, so you're talking about railway. So you're talking about 40% talking about markets. So the two big issues for entrepreneurs, attracting talent and identifying markets. So for us, by offering we have a high-speed rail that connects the city to about 10 million population around us within 1 hour, we're offering that market and focus on lifestyle. What's so interesting, sorry, just one last point, because that's a lot of governments get this wrong, is it's only 5% of them talked about taxes, and only 3% of them talked about ease of doing business. That was completely shocking. So we're going to make it very difficult for them to do business in King Abdullah Economic Zone.
So in fact, what are you going to do about taxes, just as long as you raise the issue?
Sorry?
What are you going to do about taxes, as long as you've raised the issue?
We are the 6th most efficient tax system in the world, like Texas.
There we are, guys. There we are. Okay, now given that he's got it all planned out,
Perfect.
what can you do to help him?
So similarly, we also did quantitative studies among entrepreneurs, kind of looking at the flip side of what they're really seeking out. And what we really saw was two big gaps for these urban innovators. The first was seed funding. Even when normalizing for demographic factors, urban impact entrepreneurs were less than half as likely as their more traditional peers to receive seed funding. So, think about the new economy, the next generation of Airbnbs and zip cars. These are folks that have a higher burden of proof, and it seems like real investors want traction and more customers to really put their money into models that are still new. And the second thing that we really saw was the fact that there was a mentorship gap. A lot of these urban innovators needed access to civic and government leaders. And so they're not looking to embed their product or service in government, but they are looking for government help, whether it be through navigating regulations or legislative complexities, all of the fun of dealing with cities. And so when you have government that's really willing to work with entrepreneurs, to kind of be open to chatting with them, to helping them navigate complexities of permitting and other new economy spaces, I think that's a huge advantage for entrepreneurs, and obviously something that you guys provide naturally.
So are you going to do that? Are you going to make a special part of the city that's for entrepreneurs? Are you going to look for a special area? Are you going to bring in entrepreneurs? Are you going to bring in big companies that are already proven in order to build the city?
I mean, one of the things that we realize is that we can be very successful with companies. We have Pfizer, Mars, and lots of big companies there. But I think it's so important to focus on entrepreneurship. To be honest with you, we've looked at numbers in Saudi Arabia, and big companies, when they invest $1 million, they create one job. When entrepreneurs invest $1 million, they create 18 jobs. So the multiplier is significant. Therefore, we are also focused on incubation by creating with our regulator, the government regulator, basically a 3-day package where you can come within 3 days, you can get established in terms of licensing, you can get office space, and all of the other services required, a plug-and-play service.
It sounds like they don't need you. Now, what could you add to that package that they don't have already?
Well, I would beg to differ. I think that the big thing about incubation, and many people see this in a really regional approach. So, you're the city of Detroit and you want economic revitalization, so you set up an incubator in Detroit. What is different about Tumml is that we see the sign of success for entrepreneurs as an ability to go beyond one community and to scale from city to city. So I would actually argue that it would be a lovely compliment to have our entrepreneurs expand to their city.
So I think we actually need her.
You do need her?
Yes.
Now, why do you need her?
And I can tell you why, because it's often a mistake to focus on quantity over quality. That's a mistake. Which one is the mistake, quantity or quality?
Quantity.
Yes, that's right. And I tell you why, because you
Well,
can
you
focus.
need her to answer the question, so that's for sure.
Because you can focus on creating 500 companies that are single proprietorship. And that would not have the impact of one company that can get to 500 employees really quickly in terms of ability to power to inspire, fuel, reputational impact. I mean, think about Skype and the impact on Estonia it had by being sold $2.6 billion in 2005. And now, well, a lot of Estonians want to create their own companies, right? So I think the importance of focusing on quality, which you do by actually screening, which we cannot do as a corporate, is something that's very important. So we need to really work on the details on this.
So would you take your entrepreneurs who are developing urban solutions to problems and send them over to start their businesses in Saudi Arabia, or would you come over and set your own incubator up in or accelerator over in Saudi Arabia?
We see the model as being scalable by the virtue of entrepreneurs actually going out to other cities. And so while we ourselves at Tumml are based in San Francisco, our entrepreneurs, first of all, come to us from all over the country and all over the world, but they all ultimately go back to their home city and they look to saturate one market first and potentially expand to other markets around the world. And I think Saudi Arabia is a great place for them to continue that expansion.
And would you welcome people from all over the world? How would you help them to get settled in your culture?
I mean, we are actually really focused on, first of all, attracting the Saudis who are, have quality ideas and quality work in the country and outside, but also looking regionally. In terms of expanding globally, we have been running competitions for apps in the city, and we've just basically announced one. We'll announce the 5 winners very soon. And that's one idea in which we can get some of the teams that are very relevant to King Abdullah Economic City and Saudi Arabia and incubate them or help them grow in Saudi.
So it might be a good place for young entrepreneurs to go after they go through your process. You see that it's a saleable proposition that they have to send them to Saudi Arabia. Do you think that might work?
I think it might, but I should note one thing is that, when you have urban challenges, many of them can be scalable across cities, and it doesn't mean that every single entrepreneur is a great fit, but when they're dealing with issues like economic development for blue-collar workers, that's something that many cities experience shortages of and challenges with, which is actually one of the companies that we incubated called WorkHands. So that's a good example of one that I could see being very viable across, different oceans and across the globe.
Now, before we were coming out on the stage, we were having a conversation behind the stage. And I said, do all entrepreneurs have to be young? Do they all have to be millennials, as we were talking about? What could you do for older people who actually still look good, still feel good, but at some point they've got to be 65 and they've been retired, but they've got lots of skills. Now, can they be entrepreneurs? Can you help them? Do you want them?
Absolutely. Personal opinion, I actually think it's unfortunate that in our society, we used to really revere the elderly, and now it's gotten to the point that people don't necessarily think about the elderly in those terms. And especially in the entrepreneurship world, I think that there's this archetype of who makes a good entrepreneur. It's usually a young white male in his mid-20s. And obviously that's a trend that we're really looking to buck. And at Tumml, we see a lot of diversity, both in terms of gender, but in terms of age and, kind of economic background, as well as, diversity all around. And I think that it's incredibly important to cultivate entrepreneurs who look different from the archetype, but also to bring them into startups. I think that startups provide a great opportunity for people who actually have established experience and can bring a wealth of knowledge from their corporate or nonprofit or government jobs. And I think that there's really ripe opportunity right now to help motivate some of that.
Fahd, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I think, in the region, in Saudi Arabia, we still revere our elders, and they have a lot of experience and network. And, some may be savings, so they have been successful.
They have some money. So I also think that we've had this conversation. My own opinion is that we need to take those older people who have the experience that you were talking about, Julie, and put them with the younger entrepreneurs who have the ideas, new ideas, because sometimes the younger entrepreneurs can't afford, if they've got a startup business, they can't afford a full-fledged financial director who's been the head of a big company. But the big company man, he wants to work, or woman. The younger company needs somebody with that talent, but they can't get together. So maybe is that something that you can do, is help to put them together?
We would love to do that. I think that it's a slippery slope when you try to do too much at once, and what we are ultimately focused on is helping catalyze these entrepreneurs at an early stage, but they're always looking for good talent. And so one thing we've always tried to help them with is HR and hiring strategies. And yeah, if you can get a good crop of folks, I think broadening that work base and making our entrepreneurs more diverse is incredibly important.
Okay, next question to you, Julie. What about women and men? What's the statistics? What do people think about entrepreneurs, young ones? Are there more white men? Are there more young women? Are there lots of different groups? Is it better if we put them all together?
Definitely, yes. Obviously, this is coming from a biased standpoint as a woman working.
I thought I'd ask you, but I'm going to ask Fahd too.
I think that, there are a lot of statistics that you guys have probably all heard how, venture capital funding, about 7 to 12% goes to women. So it's an incredibly low number. What we're really proud of at Tumml is the fact that our applicant base is much more diverse. We've seen about 40% women from applicant companies and from the companies that have gone through the program, which is really a point of pride for me personally, but also my co-founder is a woman. I think we have many board members who are women. So it's important to encourage by showing that there's diversity on your team. But I think it also helps with the kind of problems you're looking to solve. I mean, all of our entrepreneurs at Tumml are solving urban challenges. So you see something in your community and you want to respond to it. We had a woman founder go through our program who launched a company called Hand Up. And Hand Up is a crowdfunding tool for the homeless. And she was inspired because she walked by the same homeless person every day and she wondered what she could do to help. And basically she created this crowdfunding tool that lets you donate toward productive items like medical expenses, housing, clothing, food. And it's been really remarkable. They've taken off over the last year since they've been through our program. And I think that this was a direct response because she saw something in her community and really wanted to help. And I think that the reason we see more women doing that is because they want to have an impact and they want to solve problems that are really near and dear to them.
Now, Fahd, what can you say about having women entrepreneurs in Saudi Arabia?
I mean, they're already doing it in many ways. I think it's a mistake to see Saudi Arabia as a static state. It's actually a very dynamic state, changing very quickly. I mean, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have imagined that we have 80 women in our Shura Council, our parliament. We have women as ministers, we have women as CEOs and boards, and we have more women graduating out of college than we have men. And to be honest with you, I have a 6-year-old daughter. It'll be hard for me to imagine a world in which she cannot play a major role if she wanted to.
That's fantastic. Well, before we end up asking if there are any questions, I want to ask you, Fahd, what do you see as the goal of your city? If you could dream up how your city will look 10 years from now when we have the 13th New Cities Foundation Summit, what will your city look like? And what will be its major exports?
Well, we will have, I hope, one of the largest ports in the world. It will be a global hub for logistics and industry. We're already looking at the Red Sea region, basically East Africa and the GCC. Many people don't know this, but there are 650 million people already living there. That number will be 1.3 billion people in 2050. You're talking about GDP growth rates of 5 to 8%. So we want to serve that region in a big way. And obviously, we want to have a lot of people living there. We want to be a hub for innovation, for healthcare, for education, and also for tourism.
And do you think 10 years is the right amount of time?
I don't think about 10 years. I think about 5 years all the time. 5 years.
That's really amazing. 5 years.
Yes.
So it'll be the 8th New
Yes.
Cities Foundation.
Yes. And I promise you, ahead of that, this summit will happen in capital economics.
Ah, well, there we are.
Nice.
You heard it here. Now, I just wanted to know if anybody had any other questions from the audience, because sometimes I'm sitting out there and I'm wishing that there would be a question time, but I just saw a hand right over there. Right, you, sir.
So my name is Fahd. I've pretty much spent my entire career in urban entrepreneurship. And I was wondering if a lot of these new economy companies that everyone refers to as the big success stories, are they really creating as many jobs as we hope they will? Because youth unemployment seems to be the biggest problem in the world right now. And because of the availability of these crowd-based tools and new productivity, I'm not so sure that a lot of these companies that we talk about are creating jobs that are going to solve this problem of youth unemployment.
I think that's a great question. Do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just jump in and say, I think that a lot of times when folks refer to entrepreneurship, and especially I hear this happening in the government world, they think entrepreneurship is an automatic catalyzer for jobs. And they say, you know, we want to bring in entrepreneurs so we can create jobs. But when you actually look at the statistics, job growth when it comes to entrepreneurship can be kind of mixed. I mean, you do create jobs, but it's actually more modest relative to other economic impact factors that you've looked at. And so that's pretty true across the board. If you look at the National Business Incubation Association, they have a lot of statistics about that. What I think is more interesting about the new economy space is the fact that they breed opportunities for micro-entrepreneurship. So when you look at something like, you know, Uber, Lyft, and some of the ride-sharing companies, you're basically helping create this whole ecosystem of contract workers that can now practice either entrepreneurship or music or arts because they create other income sources through driving a car, for example. Or, you know, with Airbnb, a lot of folks refer to the fact that you're creating another income stream that helps you live in your city and maybe practice another craft or fare. And so I think that it's a little bit more mixed when it comes to how do you, you know, bring in new jobs specifically for one company. But if you look at the ecosystem effect, I think it's actually pretty huge. And that's one area of urban impact that we're really excited about, which is this idea of formalizing informal economies. And all these informal economies have started to sprout up because you have merchants and micro entrepreneurs that really want to practice their crafts, and they're getting more and more exciting ways to do it thanks to the sharing economy through the maker economy and maker cities.
That's great. There's a question over here. Just this man. Can you say who you are?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jack Kasser from the city of Johannesburg, and this is very relevant to my current position because I'm working on an economic empowerment program that mainly works with unbundling the city's own value chains and placing contracting in the hands of smaller community-based enterprises, so cooperatives and community-based companies doing what was ordinarily done by a larger company, and therefore creating more appetite for low-level, entry-level, semi-skilled labor in the process. The question I have, I suppose, relates, and it may be a little bit different in different economic contexts, but certainly from your perspective as an incubator, and I suppose it would apply to some extent to the Saudi Arabian example as well, what's the role of the larger company in creating the kind of the ecosystem that allows the smaller company to operate? Is concentration of value chain something that you confront? Is it something cities can confront and force more of an entrepreneurial ecosystem in terms of the way business is done?
So is your question, what's the role of the larger company?
And what's the role of the city in making
And what's the role of the city in making the environment one that makes entrepreneurs flourish?
Basically, yeah. What is the city's role in building that ecosystem with the established business sector as a partner?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question.
Sure.
So I could both take a chat.
Yeah. I could just jump in and say, I think a lot of folks ask, what is the role of government in all of this? Should they make procurement easier? Should they make contracting with the city easier? How do you bring in more entrepreneurs? And my personal opinion, and what we've seen at Tumml, is we actually don't work with entrepreneurs that are trying to procure city contracts because we think it's a losing battle for early stage startups. It's a really long sales cycle. It's a process that is just very labor intensive, which is true about being a startup in general, but you don't want to create extra barriers for yourself at an early stage. That said, many of the companies that are really great examples in the space, like Zipcar, later, a decade on, went after fleet contracts down the road. But I think at an early stage, it's not the job of government to necessarily have to engage with startups formally by bringing them in, making them the contractor, making them go through the procurement process. Likewise with the big companies, what we've seen is that most big companies really want innovation. They want to encourage innovation. Many of them have their own research centers. Many of them put money behind accelerators and incubators because they either want to license from or acquire talent from these entrepreneurs. And I think that you can naturally create forums that are pretty low intensity for a city. So for example, if you want to set up events or networking or do some sort of showcase, all of those small things actually do build up to an ecosystem that creates friendliness between companies, governments, and startups. And frankly, from a startup perspective, the big thing is getting exposure. You want exposure to big companies. You want exposure to government. You want people using your tools and knowing about your tools so you can buy them.
And in the end of the day, the big companies often buy the small companies and make lots of people very happy.
Yes.
Do you have a thought about what the government can do to help the entrepreneurs?
Well, I think, for us as a city, I don't really believe that we are going to build a city or that governments build cities. I think those who build cities are the corporations and the people that invest. So our role as a city, as a developer, and I think the role of the government is to be a catalyzer for people's ambitions. So if you offer transparency, if you offer community engagement, and you do constant training, people have their ideas and they will figure it out on their own. And we see entrepreneurship all the time, from the fishing people in the city all the way to contractors, small contractors that have become big as we have risen over the past 8 years.
Well, I think another thought about your question is I remember when I was younger, San Francisco was a very beautiful place to live, but it was pretty boring, actually. It was a pretty boring place. And then all of a sudden, somehow or other, Stanford and the Valley, and things changed, and everybody wanted to live there. Boston was always a great place to go to school, but it wasn't until there was this ring of places where you could be an entrepreneur that things happened. In Europe, we're trying to figure out, how did San Francisco do it? How did Boston do it? How can we in London figure out a way to take the Cambridge entrepreneurs and bring them down to London? So there must be a way that governments are empowering the entrepreneurs so that they come and live there. And I think when you are getting around to getting that part of your city, Fahd, you'll be emulating what they're doing in San Francisco. Look at Dallas. This is entrepreneurial all by itself. We are here because the people of Dallas were entrepreneurial enough to go to the people from the New Cities Foundation, from John and Matria, and sell their city. That's entrepreneurial all by itself, right? They want you, all of us, to be in their city, and they're thinking about it. So I think entrepreneurial is happening all the time. We're all trying to create something new, something different, something that will sell, that will make people's lives better. And I think at this point, given that we're just about out of time, I would like to ask each of the panelists if they have two-sentence way of summing up why they think entrepreneurialism is important for a city.
Well, I think in at least the things that I've seen, that 3% of the companies in this country are what's considered high growth. And over the past 15 years, they have created most of the jobs and the economic development. So we certainly believe in the model. What I don't believe in is what a lot of governments around the world are trying to do today, which is emulate Silicon Valley, which is a model that is almost impossible to copy. So I think they should focus on local conditions, and you have many examples around the world where that has worked.
What's exciting to me about entrepreneurship is the fact that you really see it from the bottom up. These are people who look at problems in their community and they find really innovative and creative ways to solve it. And I think that's going to change the way that we live and get around our cities.
So what's exciting to me about entrepreneurship is that we've been entrepreneurs from the very beginning. The first people who discovered fire, the first people that discovered the wheel, the first people, Henry Ford, when he had all those cars coming down the line. They've been entrepreneurs from the beginning of time. What we have now is an acceleration of entrepreneurship. We've put a name on it. We're training our children and our grandchildren that it's something that we want to be. And we're part of it, what's happening in the urbanization of our cities, but right here in the New Cities Foundation. We're lucky we're here with these entrepreneurs, big cities, small businesses, and in a city that's been so welcoming to us. So with that, I'd like all of us to give a round of applause to our panelists.